Welcome to our noon edition of Arirang News. Here are the headlines for this hour. South Korea is seeing the biggest labor action by doctors in years. Hundreds from Seoul's 5 big hospitals have walked off the job as of 6 a.m. Tuesday. For days, doctors have warned of a healthcare catastrophe if the government does not retract its decision to increase the nationwide med school admission cap. Officials haven't backed down, though. Instead, they warned that they, too, would be revoking the licenses of 2 executives from the Korean Medical Association. They've also been rolling out emergency response measures to deal with today's sudden medical personnel shortage at hospitals. The widow of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny accused President Vladimir Putin of being responsible for her husband's death. The Kremlin has since dismissed all claims, but the U.S. and EU have hinted that they would possibly slap a fresh round of sanctions against Moscow. The U.S. has proposed a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Though Washington has traditionally protected its ally Israel from UN actions, it has been becoming more vocal about how a further Israeli ground offensive into Rafah would harm countless civilians and cause more displacement. Their latest UN Security Council draft resolution still falls short of many other member countries who are demanding Israel to stop all attacks immediately. Starting off with the biggest collective action doctors in the country are showing in years. After the Yoon administration announced its plan to expand the medical school admission quota from next year, doctors' groups have been submitting letters of resignation in protest. Trainee doctors at major hospitals have opted to stop working from this morning, raising concerns of a healthcare catastrophe. Our correspondent An Sung-jin is at one of the top 5 hospitals where doctors have been walking out of. Sung-jin, tell us a little bit more about the scene you're at and how the country's doctors are taking collective action.
Good afternoon, Yeon. I'm standing in front of Severance Hospital in Sinchon, Seoul, where trainee doctors have just started walking out from 6 a.m. this morning. Now, this hospital is one of South Korea's so-called Big 5 hospitals, where more than 20% of the total number of trainee doctors work. These Big 5 hospitals have nearly 3,000 residents, and 1/3 of those residents have submitted their resignations. This hospital in particular saw the most cases of doctors leaving the workplace. These walkouts are in protest of a government policy which aims to increase the quota of medical school admissions by 2,000 places starting next year. Doctors' groups argue that increasing the number of doctors would lead to unnecessary medical care, on top of a lack of incentives for doctors to practice in essential areas such as pediatrics and emergency medicine. But health authorities said more doctors are vital to keep up with the country's fast-aging population. The number of doctors in the country relative to the size of the population is reportedly among the lowest in the developed world. As these trainees doctors play a key role in medical processes, at least 25 operations have been canceled and 34 official complaints have been made by patients. As of 11 p.m. yesterday, more than half of other trainee doctors from other major hospitals nationwide, nearly 7,000 residents in all, have submitted their resignation letters as well. As walkouts began today after the mass resignation of trainee doctors, the health ministry and medical community says that the temporary system they've put in place could hold up for only 2 or 3 weeks without these key medical personnel. The Korean Medical Residents Association will be discussing further responses at the emergency meeting, which just began at noon.
Right, and the health ministry and officials have been convening to find ways to better respond to this crisis. With concerns over a lack of necessary medical personnel at those hospitals, though, how is the government currently looking to respond to this?
About 400 emergency medical institutions nationwide will be monitored 24 hours a day from the National Medical Center. If the gap due to a lack of necessary doctors remains for a longer period, the government also announced that it will allow non-face-to-face treatment.
There are 12 military hospitals where emergency rooms are operating. We have also decided to open them to civilians.
Now, the government has maintained its position, refusing to accept doctors' demands and denouncing their collective action as intolerable. It is said that President Yoon said that the medical community cannot defeat the people. The Yoon administration had sent a prior notice to key figures such as the chairman of the Emergency Response Committee of the Korean Medical Association regarding the suspension of their doctor's license. The health ministry also just issued a work start order to 757 medical residents. Whether this will be taken as a warning to the medical community will be something to look out for. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Yeon.
All right, thank you, Sung-jin. That was An Sung-jin from Severance Hospital here in Seoul. Now moving on to economy. Consumers in South Korea believe that inflation rates will slow down despite the high price of fruit. That's according to a Bank of Korea report released on Tuesday, which said that consumers in February expected to see an inflation rate of 3% over the next year. The forecast remains the same as the month before, but has shown a steady decline since seeing a peak of 4.7% in July of 2022. The agency said that high prices for fruit and dining out during the National Lunar New Year holiday, also known as Seollal in Korean, contributed to the forecast being the same as in January. The main opposition Democratic Party floor leader, Hong Ik-kyo, appealed for support at the upcoming general election, saying that the DP is the only alternative for overcoming the challenges facing South Korea. In a speech at the National Assembly on Tuesday, Hong also claimed the economy is on the brink of collapse. He emphasized that a fair economic system is an area where ruling and opposition parties should work together, suggesting stronger government responsibility for housing, healthcare, and education, as well as a reduction in working hours. The ruling People Power Party floor leader, Yoon Jae-ok, is scheduled to deliver a speech on Wednesday. The widow of Alexei Navalny has spoken out, saying that Russian President Vladimir Putin is behind the death of her husband. The EU and the US are closing in on fresh sanctions against Russia over the death of Navalny. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The widow of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of being responsible for the death of her husband, adding she will continue on with her husband's fight. In an 8-minute video posted on her late husband's social media platforms, Yulia Navalnaya on Monday said the Russian leader killed the father of her children and took away the most precious thing. She further accused Russian authorities of hiding Navalny's body in a move to disguise the cause of his death, adding that they're only waiting for traces of another of Putin's Novichok to disappear, referring to a nerve agent allegedly used by Russia's security service. The EU is now looking into fresh sanctions against Moscow over the death of Putin's critic. Germany, Lithuania, and Sweden were among EU nations calling for specific new penalties against Russia. The discussions came during a meeting of 27 EU foreign ministers scheduled before the death of Navalny, where EU's top diplomat Josep Borrell suggested that Russian prison officials linked to Navalny's death could be added to the list of those subject to asset freezes and travel ban. U.S. President Joe Biden also hinted at new sanctions, while also directly blaming Putin for the death of Navalny.
But the fact of the matter is, Putin is responsible. Whether he ordered it or not, he is responsible for the circumstances that put that man in. And he is a reflection of who he is. And it just cannot be tolerated. I said there would be a price to pay.
Meanwhile, Russia says an investigation into the death of Navalny is underway, adding that all due actions are being taken. The Kremlin added that any accusation against its president is both rude and gross, as there is no information on the cause of death. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has presented North Korean leader Kim Jong-un with a Russian car. This is according to the North's official newspaper, Noldong-sinmun, on Tuesday. The leader's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, said the gift is a clear indication of the close friendship between the leaders of Pyongyang and Moscow. A senior official at South Korea's unification ministry told reporters that sending a luxury car to North Korea violates UN Security Council resolutions. The official condemned North Korea for publicly announcing the gift, while calling for Russia to realize its responsibility as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Despite initial claims that they would veto any UNSC resolutions on a Gaza ceasefire, the United States on Monday drafted a resolution calling for a temporary ceasefire as soon as it's practical in the region. While this does rival an initial draft resolution put forward by Algeria that called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, it is the first time that Washington has made a proposal using the exact word ceasefire. Lee Eun-jin reports.
On Monday, the United States circulated a proposed UN Security Council resolution that supports a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. The resolution states a temporary ceasefire would be based on the formula of all hostages being released, while also lifting all barriers to provide humanitarian assistance at scale in the Gaza Strip. The draft also warns Israel not to launch a ground offensive in Rafah, stressing that such major military action should not proceed under the current circumstances. This is the second time since October 7th that Washington has proposed a Security Council resolution on Gaza. The first proposal in late October was vetoed by Russia and China. The latest draft comes more than 2 weeks after an initial draft was put forward by Algeria, the current non-permanent Arab member of the Security Council, which demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. That draft resolution was set to be put up for a vote on Tuesday, but U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield signaled it would be vetoed, saying it would jeopardize any negotiation talks to broker a pause in the war and the release of hostages held by Hamas. The U.S. proposal may fall short of the international call for an immediate ceasefire, but the significance stands in Washington's use of the word ceasefire, which Israel is against. While the U.S. has been ready to protect Israel, the latest change in Washington's wording signals a warning shot to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. International Crisis Group UN Director Richard Gowan also said Israel would now be more concerned by the text Washington drafted, and that it is the strongest signal the U.S. has sent at the UN so far that Israel cannot rely on American diplomatic protection indefinitely. For a resolution to pass, it needs at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes by the permanent members, the U.S., France, the UK, Russia, or China. It is not immediately clear when or if the U.S. draft resolution would be put to a vote. 이은진, Arirang News.
Earlier this month, the South Korean Unification Ministry released a report on the reality of the North Korean economy and society based on testimonies of more than 6,000 defectors. Minister Kim Jong-un says it's K-dramas that are driving people in North Korea to want to leave the regime. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil sat down with the minister to find out more.
While K-dramas have fans around the world, there are also those watching in secret, in hiding in North Korea. Fans in other countries may admire the unique plots, dramatic twists, and of course the actors. But for some people in North Korea, watching K-dramas led them to a decision that could cost them their lives.
The report suggests that more than 83% of North Korean defectors watched South Korean dramas when they were in the North. When they watch South Korean dramas, they can feel that South Korean society is free and wealthy. And the reality of South Korea in these dramas is different from what the North's regime has brainwashed its people to believe.
Stairway to Heaven, My Love from the Star, and Autumn in My Heart, classics for K-drama fans, were among those frequently mentioned.
The number of defectors last year was about 3 times higher than in 2022. It was 196 people, and about half of them were the MZ generation of North Korea in their 20s and 30s. The number proves that K-dramas have a big impact on young people in the North.
The spread of K-dramas actually poses such a threat to the regime that back in 2020, Pyongyang made a stricter law that bans North Koreans from watching it. Those caught spreading K-dramas could now even face the death penalty. With the regime tightening its already tight controls, the actual lives of the residents aren't getting better. The report says 7 out of 10 people said they had not received any food rations from the state since Kim Jong-un became leader. A whopping 38.3% said they have never been to a hospital. And almost no one in North Korea has ever used the internet.
Surely, I think Leader Kim Jong-un also knows the suffering of the residents, and that if this continues, the regime isn't sustainable. Where is he heading with this?
I think if the Kim Jong-un regime doesn't give up on developing nuclear and missile programs, it'll fall into a military dilemma. If the regime keeps spending its resources on nuclear and missile development, the economic hardships within North Korea will get worse. And people's feelings will be against the regime even more.
Can doubt fill the minds of North Korean people? The report says this is already happening, and the number of doubters is increasing. 56.3% of the respondents who have recently defected said they feel negative about the succession planning that keeps power within the Kim family.
What's the reason for South Korean government to let the international community know the reality of North Korean residents?
North Korea's poor human rights situation and security issues cannot be separated. So, to bring righteous changes in the North Korean society would help not just its residents, but also help bring peace on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, and for the world.
The minister added that North Korean residents would wish to reunify not with China nor Russia, but with South Korea, and that Seoul will continue to strive for reunification that guarantees peace and freedom. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Artificial intelligence technology has been developed to transform robots on industrial sites into smarter ones that can understand human speech. Jeong-ju has the details.
작업대로 이동.
The robot understands the researcher's words and starts moving.
작업 시작.
물체짓기를 시작합니다.
The robot then moves parts to the workstation and starts assembling them. It understands what people say and carries out their orders. A regular robot transforms into a smart robot when a special artificial intelligence developed by South Korean researchers is installed.
Workers unfamiliar with robots can easily use them, which can improve productivity in the manufacturing industry overall.
Commands can be given not only through voice but also through text. Individuals can program the working process in layman's terms depending on the situation without the need for experts. The artificial intelligence can create the optimal working sequence and movements tailored to the site in a virtual space.
We developed automation tech that understands commands, generates performance order and executes them simultaneously, a world first for actual application.
AI technology that can easily create speech-understanding robots is currently being tested at an electronic parts factory in Cheongju. If the robot's effectiveness is confirmed, it is expected to enable scenarios where humans and robots collaborate as seen in similar scenes in movies. Jeong-ju, Arirang News.
Antibiotics are an important medicine, but they are also known to have negative side effects, and that there are even superbacteria that are immune to antibiotics. However, Korean researchers have developed a new technology that can treat wounds on the skin without them. Kim Dami tells us more.
Antibiotics treat wounds by restricting the spread of infection, but when used incorrectly, they can in fact be toxic. Antibiotic resistance not only takes away from the effectiveness of treatment, but even leads to a rise in mutations or so-called superbacteria.
Antibiotics don't work on superbacteria, so there is no treatment when infected by them. For elderly or critically ill patients with a weakened immune system, this is fatal.
In order to overcome this problem, a team of Korean researchers has developed a technology where skin wounds can be treated without antibiotics. Based on the metal-organic framework used on industrial sites, the research team has found a way to incorporate zirconium. The shiny silver-gray metal is highly ductile and extremely resistant to corrosion and heat, but its effect when applied to the skin suppresses inflammation and catches elements like active oxygen molecules and immunity proteins that interfere with the wound recovery process. The substance was applied to a wound on a mouse and the wound healed just in 2 weeks.
It has these proteins called cytokines that reduce inflammation. Extracting these proteins brings the effect of speeding up the healing of wounds.
This substance has high biostability, which means it is safe for use on the human body and is designed to break down and naturally discharge out of the body. The research team says the next step would be to go beyond external wounds on the skin and turn this substance into a pill for the treatment of inflammatory diseases. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. At The Hague, Palestinian representatives on Monday asked the judges at the UN's International Court of Justice to declare Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories illegal. The International Court of Justice began a week of hearings on Monday as a result of the UN General Assembly's 2022 resolution, which called for an advisory non-binding opinion of the court on the legality of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories since 1967. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki and UN envoy Riyad Mansour said the case may contribute to a two-state solution and a sustainable peace. Al-Maliki, in his speech, argued that Palestinians have suffered from decades of discrimination and apartheid and were left only with the choice of displacement, subjugation or death. 52 states and 3 organizations, the Arab League, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and Africa Union, will present arguments to the International Court's 15-judge panel until February 26th. In Indonesia, at least 71 election workers have died from exhaustion since the world's largest single-day election was held in Indonesia last week. The chairman of the nation's polling body said Monday that some 4,000 other election workers had taken ill since the February 14th election due to fatigue from helping to run the national event. 5 million paid volunteers worked at some 800,000 polling stations to host the more than 200 million citizens who had registered to cast their votes. While voting lasted for about 6 hours, the post-vote distribution, counting and reporting of paper ballots in some cases lasted over 12 hours. The government had imposed an age cap and mandatory health checks for volunteers after over 500 polling station workers died following the 2019 Indonesian election. In Sudan, a report released on Sunday by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs revealed that some 25 million people, 14 million of them children, require humanitarian assistance due to a violent internal conflict which has passed its 10 months. The civil war between the Rapid Support Forces and Sudanese armed forces has left the population with limited access to medical care. According to the UN's Sudan Situation Report, about 65% of the population lacks access to health care, while up to 80% of hospitals in conflict areas are no longer functional. The report also said diseases such as cholera, measles, malaria and dengue fever are claiming Sudanese lives. At London Fashion Week, the catwalk took on a literal meaning at the Loving Cats Worldwide's Castravaganza show. Felines took centre stage at London's Olympia on Sunday, with the UK's most lavish pampered cats carried down the runway by their owners. Stephen Meserve, the founder of Loving Cats Worldwide, said that while the event took place during London Fashion Week, we have our own catwalk here and our models are way cuter. Castravaganza shows are also heading to countries including Canada, Colombia and Japan, as well as cities in the US and the UK. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. East of Gangwon-do is on high alert against heavy snowfall, while the rest of the country will see rain. Mountainous regions in Gangwon-do especially are forecast to see 50 centimeters of blizzards into tomorrow, with a heavy snow advisory issued in the area. So please stay safe. Meanwhile, the East Coast could see 20 to 60 millimeters of rain, while Jeju Island could receive up to 80 millimeters of heavy showers. But roller coaster temperatures continue in most places. After a much chillier start to the morning, highs rise to 9 degrees in the capital, but those in the south are seeing highs going down nearly 10 degrees lower than yesterday. And it will be colder tomorrow in most parts of Korea. For today, Seoul gets up to 9 degrees, Gwangju topping out at 11 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow looks to be a snowy one for the central regions and the capital area, and it will only get chillier as we head into the end of the week, while Jeju Island will be rainy through Sunday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you today. We'll bring you more stories from Korea and around the world at the same time tomorrow.